going to look at the Renaissance. This I've set to be around 1300 to 1600 for our purposes in the development of the art we're going to look at. There's a couple of things just to note before we even start looking at the work. The biggest thing is how I've chosen to present it to you. I've actually divided it up by geography. So I've taken the northern part of Europe and I'm focusing on the Northern Renaissance first, and then we switched to the Southern Renaissance, or really the Italian Renaissance. So I'm doing that because there's a couple big differences between these areas in Europe in terms of what the art's looking like, what it's about, and the materials that they're using. And there's just a different look and the way that they influence each other. That also happens because we're still in the age, right, of where people are able to travel and move about, but not like today. So you were more heavily influenced by the things that were closer to you than today. The other things to take note of are what is jotted down here, but the big things are the who. The idea of the individual artist becoming kind of the genius master peacemaker comes on board in a way that, artists become paid, they get patrons and they're paid to do their work. They're hired. They can do this full time with themselves. They're not just kind of these craftspeople that, all right, you need to just go over there and make 10 million pots and, just copy the guy before you. They get to explore their own style a bit more. And that carries through to today. It influences us now, which is why the Renaissance really is so important for us, and we should understand that. What it looks like we're going to get to of the big changes, but a lot of that is like, here's just a quick bulleted list of, what we're seeing and what the big jumps are. The why is also interesting. We still have that idea of religious practice, belief systems, and wanting to share the word of your religion with the masses of people coming to worship. That still stays true, but we also start to get this other thing happening where painters are starting to paint kind of the average people or what's happening out there in their neck of the woods. So we're going to look at that. So let's jump in. We're going to start with the Northern Renaissance, and we're going to start with this painter, Van Eyck. This painting in and of itself is very, very famous, but it highlights something that really is so important for what happens in art moving forward from here. The idea of oil paint becoming the paint that everyone wants to use as far as 2D dimensional work. So he is the one who really tweaked this paint medium and made it work, made it stable, and was able to work the colors up to a full color spectrum. So now we have painters having full control over their material. Then they can start to focus on, okay, how do I use this material now to make it look more real? Which is what he's starting to do here. The other reason this particular painting is so famous is because everything in it is symbolic. So there's nothing happening in here that doesn't have kind of an underlying message. You guys might look at this and go, okay, it's just they're standing in the bedroom, they're getting married. Are they already married? She looks pregnant. No, she's not. That was just style of dress back then. Even the placement of them in the bedroom is actually symbolic and not what you would normally see, because you would not enter the private bedchambers in somebody's home like this at all. That would have been cut off from most people. So the fact that they're placed in the bedroom is sending that message of what the point of marriage is, right? Especially back then. He's done something else that's quite interesting that also points us in the direction of the idea of that genius individual artist. He's painted himself. This is a convex mirror, and in it we see the back of the couple, and then he's standing in between them right there. So, and he's also signed his name right dead eye center in the painting. So for those reasons, this becomes a true masterpiece. Not only for the quality of the paint, the quality of his techniques in working that paint for realism, being accurate with detail, and the symbolism and the composition, it just really kind of knocks it out of the park in terms of this is a painting that everyone that does any kind of art history class that deals with the Renaissance or is a survey art history class, you're going to be talking about this painting. So that's why I've included it, just as a, hey, you should be aware of its existence. So moving on to the next painter we're going to look at, he's a little bit later after Van Eyck, is Durer. He is arguably a really, really great artist that I would say should be as recognized as Da Vinci in terms of what he was capable of in a variety of materials and his execution of of his art. Really, look at this painting is incredible. It is about as photorealistic as you can get, and it was painted over 500 years ago. So you know that in and of itself shows his level of mastery of painting. The other things that are interesting about him is he also loved to print. He loved to make prints, and he this is a woodcut. He also did etching, which is on a metal plate, and he liked the idea of being able to share his artwork and spread the word and kind of advertise himself, his abilities, and he also would do political cartoons, because this is the time when we have that idea of, hey, we can start to print things for mass production so more people can see what it is you're making. So he's really well known for that as well. So let's move on to our last painter in the north, Bruegel. Now, he kind of highlights this change that's happening in the north. If you notice, all these pieces we've looked at, it's not religiously driven. These are made either for a patron or someone hires them that has some money. So that's what the marriage painting that Van Eyck made. And then Durer is doing a variety of things, but it's not just I want to share the word of my beliefs with the public. It is I want to show the world as I see it that I live in and the people. So Bruegel takes that idea to the tenfold because he actually starts painting what we call genre paintings, which is these people aren't famous at all and they actually could never afford to have a painting made of them ever. So, but he wanted to share that. He wanted to capture what he called the noble peasant, which was these people that had the most noblest job to him, which was making sure that we can all survive, making food happen. Um, so he has many, many paintings like this that capture, kind of what we'll call peasant scenery life of kind of more the average person in this area of the world at this time period. So we're going to leave the north behind and jump to the south now. So now we're in Italy. So we've gone backwards in time a little bit. And so the work is going to, again, look a little bit more underdeveloped in terms of maybe color and sophistication of realism for a little bit. So we're starting off with this guy leading to this one. But Giotto is really the first Renaissance painter that comes on board where we're leaving those Middle Ages behind and he's starting to do some more sophisticated things. So you can see he's overlapped the figures and the space itself just looks more believable. And the people are pretty much proportional. So unlike the Christian art that came before where it's like, yeah, what's going on here? This looks slightly odd and off. That is starting to go away. And Fra Angelico is also doing that for us in his scene. But of course, here we're back to that religious idea of the artwork we're making is in the service of our God and the church and kind of making sure that we're sharing those stories visually with people. So moving on, we're going to look at Botticelli. Now, he is the first getting a little bit more sophisticated, coming on board to our what I call Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle painters in Italy, which you'll see what I mean by that in a minute if you don't know what I mean. So he comes a little bit before then, but this painting is very interesting. It's also very famous, but it's doing a couple of things that we're going to talk about. So they were interested in realism and really observing life and capturing that in Italy and the Southern Renaissance as well. But they actually went in another direction with this idea of reality, and they pushed it to this idea of idealized people. They wanted to make like the perfect humans, like the most beautiful people you could imagine. That's what they wanted to do in all their paintings. So you're going to see that starting to happen in the next painters we're going to look at. The other big difference is they're also relying a bit on kind of ancient Rome and some of that history of art that happened, for their culture. They're also not using oil. So it's interesting, in Italy, they stick with tempera. They do not use that paint medium of oil yet. So it takes us to get to Da Vinci to start to move us away from the tempera paint and painting on plaster to I'm going to go with the oil paint. So Da Vinci, of course, we know about him. There's a lot we could say about Da Vinci, but we're going to focus on the fact that I like to have you guys walk away having this understanding about him. I think we think of him as an artist, but he actually is just as much an inventor and a scientist as a painter. And he considered himself that. He actually would list, I can paint last when he would advertise his services to kings. He would say, oh, yeah, and by the way, I'm also a painter. So he was interested in the visual, I'll say, trickery of figuring out how to make that flat surface look 3D. But I don't think he was really passionate about kind of the creative, like, I am an artist. He had so many other things that he was focused on. We remember him as a painter, which is interesting because that's not how I think he would have described himself to us today. The Mona Lisa, we may come back to that and talk about that painting, but we're going to leave it alone, except you've seen it and there's a lot going on and there's a reason why she's so famous, and it's not necessarily because of the actual painting itself. There's something that happened with the painting that actually made it pretty famous in the world. But we're going to jump from Da Vinci to Michelangelo. So here we're coming back to the fresco or tempera paint on plaster. That's why there's all these cracks. Those cracks are the plaster cracking. But also look at what's happening with these people. Are these average people we can see anywhere? No. Michelangelo was very much about the beautiful, perfect human, and that's what he painted. But again, perfect proportions, anatomy, maybe slightly exaggerated, but still, he's nailing it. It's interesting. He considered himself to be a sculptor, and he really actually did not want to paint this. He was angry about it, but they kind of roped him into it. So we're going to move on to our last Italian Renaissance painter, Raphael. I have this painting pulled. This is actually in the Sistine Chapel as well. Because it highlights another thing that's happened in the Renaissance that, again, makes the Renaissance in terms of art. We have the use of perspective. We think of it now like, oh yeah, perspective, like I've been taught that or I've heard of that. Well, this idea didn't exist, and people had to actually there was a book that was written about it. They studied and figured out, how do I actually make this happen? There's a set of rules you follow to create a space like this in architecture that makes it look realistic and believable. So that's what Raphael is using in this painting. There also was a popular thing to do to reference the past. And when I mean the past, I mean the ancient cultures that they looked up to in the Renaissance. So they very much looked up to ancient Greece and ancient Rome, of course, but ancient Greece as being kind of the birthplace of, ideas and philosophy and art. So of course, he would be looking back to that and using that as subject matter for his paintings in the Renaissance. The last painter we're going to look at really leads us as a bridge to the next era of change in art that we're going to look at. So El Greco was Spanish, but he also, studied in Italy and kind of moved around Europe. But as you read here, he was more interested in style and color and getting an emotive response when you look at a painting than just being perfectly realistic with everything. And so he's moving us away from that idea of like, nope, I just must capture what real life looks like, or maybe I make it kind of perfect life, but it's still very accurate to the way things look, and that's just how I want my paintings to look. So this wraps up the Renaissance for what we're going to look at. Again, a lot of changes. There's so much to talk about, guys. But, again, this is for you to get an overview and a taste for, what happened over the course of time in this area of the world. Stay tuned for our next phase.